I'm reading from Rays of the One Light, weekly commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, written by Swami Kriyananda based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. This week's reading is Reincarnation, the Spiral Stairway. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. In the book of Revelation, chapter 3, Jesus Christ tells us, "Him that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out." There is a difference between church dogmas, which are based on reasoned deductions from spiritual statements, and the pronouncements of wisdom, which are based on the inner realization of spiritual truths. I'm going to read that again. There is a difference between church dogmas, which are based on reasoned deductions from scriptural statements, and the pronouncements of wisdom, which are based on the inner realization of spiritual truths. Reason, like a train, can only follow already existing tracks of human experience. Human memory, being short, is seldom able to cross back over the threshold of a person's present existence. Biblical references to previous lifetimes on earth are overlooked in the deductive process, and we find them excluded from the body of official dogma. Therefore, nevertheless, such references do exist. The Bible itself presents them, as does Jesus in this passage, not as abstract teachings, but as direct personal perception of truth. In the same way, Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita silences Arjuna's reasonable doubts on the subject, not by reasoned argument, but by the frank statement contained in the 4th chapter of that great scripture. Arjuna, you and I have passed through many births. I know all of them, though you, O chastiser of foes, recall them not. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. I'm always so happy to take this mask off for a few minutes. I feel like I'm talking through a pillow. So this is a very interesting topic. I know let me start by saying I had the great good fortune of being born and raised in the country. And so where I grew up, of course, this wouldn't be a great good fortune to a lot of people. They'd just be bored out of their minds. But I loved the quiet. I was very, very happy to just have peace. Where I grew up, there were just fields and forests and a scattering of little houses and farms around. We never heard a siren or a fire truck, or much traffic. It was just peace. And even so, when I was 3 years old, my grandmother lived not very far away. So I took off by myself. I was going to walk to Grandma's house because my parents were too loud. I just wanted quiet. So this is the samskars that we come into this life with, the tendencies, the desires, the habits, all that stuff. They're in the vrittis of the spine. They're just part of the makeup of our being. And this is what we need to work through, what we need to grow and evolve. Well, part of the joy of living in the country was that in the summer we would sit on the porch and contemplate the stars. They were very vivid. There was no pollution around. They were just a wide expanse of stars. And so from an early age, I would contemplate the universe. This is one of the reasons why we want to get land in the country, so that we can see the stars, contemplate in the quiet, and meditate on our purpose in life, which is to realize our full potential, to realize who we really are in our divine nature, not just our human nature. And when you contemplate the stars, one of the main things you think about is the vastness of time. The billions of years it took to create this earth. And you start thinking about how the moon was close by and formulating the earth, and it crashed into the earth, so scientists think it these days. They crashed into it, into each other. And somehow the moon formed and is at the perfect distance from the earth. The moon has such an influence on all living creatures, on our own bodies. The water, we're 90% or something of water ourselves. So the moon has that magnetic pull. It's all such an intricate clockwork dance. And did that just spring into being from nothing? You contemplate this amazing solar system that we're part of. And do you think that the billions of years it took to set this stage, and then here we come, and we human beings are alive here on earth for an hour, or 5 years, or 50 years, or even 300 years? It's just a moment, just a flash. And yet the Bible tells us, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect." Okay, we're going to do that in one lifetime? Meanwhile, we're struggling through school and to make a living and have a family and support everybody. And oh yeah, we've got to become perfect. Well, let me see if I can do that this weekend. How are we going to do that? And everything in nature takes time. Even volcanic eruptions are working on it for a long, long time before they erupt. So we have to think in terms of longer rhythms. And so I know for myself, growing up in the country, contemplating the stars and contemplating life, now it just didn't make any sense, and I railed at heaven, trying to figure out how all the inequalities of life worked with a just God, with a God who is love. How could that be? And then, I gave God an ultimatum. Okay, I'm gonna go with it here for a few more years, but then you better show me some answers or I'm out of here. And fortunately, he showed me these teachings. And as soon as I understood the concept of reincarnation, then everything fell into place. This is a school that we're in. This is a wonderful opportunity every day, every breath, to grow and change and evolve. And if we look at it in that way, and we have perseverance, as this affirmation chides us to have, then we will make progress and we will change. It reminds me of that passage in the Festival of Light, the forming of stars and moons and planets, of galaxies revolving on the tides of space, had but this for its design, the birth of life. And with life's birth, the dawn of self-awareness. That's what we're here for. That's what all of life is evolving towards. Self-awareness. Passage through dim corridors of waking consciousness to emerge at last into perfect light, perfect joy. That is the destiny of every one of us, of every creature in this universe. And so when Jesus says this, him that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my Father, and he shall go no more out. He's referring to this task that we have to become perfect. He that overcometh. And Yogananda tells us that overcoming means to overcome the ego with its constant clamoring for sense gratification. It is relentless. But that's our task. We have to overcome that ego, to stop thinking about ourselves, our own pain, our own grief, our own struggles, our own desires, and serve and give and love. Even when it's hard, even when you don't want to, even when it's the last thing you want to do. But if we turn towards that light, even in our darkest moments, God helps us. God comes. Spirit comes. So, he that overcometh, I will make a pillar. A pillar upholds the building. A pillar upholds the truth in this context. A pillar in the temple of my Father. The temple of my Father, Yogananda says, is the temple of omnipresence, the temple of infinite consciousness. And he shall go no more out. In that way, when we are a pillar of an embodiment of truth, one with infinite consciousness, it seems like a long way from now, but we will get there. That is our destiny. And every day we are moving towards that consciousness, if that's what we want to do. Or we can stay here and muck around as much as we want to. God has infinite patience. We can take as long as we want. It's just that it comes with suffering. And yoga is the pain-free state. Now, let's see, which do I want? Suffering or joy and bliss. So we will go no more out means that we won't be bound to that wheel of constant reincarnation, life, birth, life, death, birth, life, death, on and on and on. We get off the wheel. And then Krishna says, Arjuna, you and I have passed through many births on that wheel of birth, life, and death. I know all of them. Though you, O chastiser of foes, remember them not. Krishna isn't saying, I remember them all. He's saying, I know them all, because he's beyond time. But you, O chastiser of foes, why does he say, O chastiser of foes? Because he's saying, you wield the sword of discrimination. You are learning about truth. You are evolving and growing, and you are a yogi, and you are moving through this Maya and becoming free. But Krishna doesn't have to be wielding a sword of discrimination. He's already a pillar of truth. He's an embodiment of truth. And so he can just say this statement, and you feel the authority of it. You feel the truth of it. He doesn't have to. He's saying this in response to Arjuna saying, now, how is it that, Krishna, you're talking about things that happened before you were born? I don't understand. Krishna isn't saying, well, you see, there's this thing called reincarnation, and he's not saying any of that. He's not explaining. He's just saying, you and I have passed through many births. I know all of them, though you don't remember them. Any new teaching, any new fad that comes along of this way of doing yoga or anything like that, any expression of so-called truth, what we need to do is measure it against timeless wisdom, the wisdom of the ages. It's been interesting to me. I grew up at Ananda, actually. Even though I came when I was in my early 20s, I was still such a kid. And so I feel like I grew up at Ananda. And what I used to do, I had many jobs, but eventually I had a stained glass studio because our Ananda construction company wanted to put stained glass in their spec houses, so I learned how to do it. It was a perfect job for me because I was in my studio 10, 12 hours a day, working quietly, listening to Swami Kriyananda's voice through his recordings. So hours and hours and hours every day, I would just listen to this healing truth coming through him. It was fantastic. I really recommend it because even though that was in 1975 and 6 and 7, I listen to those same tapes today and they are perfectly relevant. They are exactly what I need every day. Timeless wisdom based on truth. It doesn't have an expiration date. It doesn't go bad in the refrigerator. It's the same. And if we align ourselves with that, then everything is moving us towards the light. So I will close now with this beautiful little quotation from St. John of the Cross. And it's a wonderful way to live and grow in that light. He says, "Live in this world as if only God and your soul were in it. Then your heart will never be made captive by any earthly thing." So he's not saying to be selfish and just think, okay, it's me and God. Nobody else exists. Nothing else exists. He's saying, see God in everything, in every person, in every situation, in every circumstance, in every feeling of your heart. See God there. Interact with God as you are interacting with every person, with every cat who comes meowing at your door, every situation. Because remember, God made all things. There is only God. So even though it all, through Maya, seems like we're separate beings, everything is broken up into little measured units. Everything is God. So if we interact in the world as though we are interacting with God in every moment, then our awareness of Him will grow in every moment.
This topic of reincarnation is one that, for me, was not a natural. Growing up, I remember my mom was sort of dabbling in New Age thought and philosophy when I was a teenager, and she, happened to say the word reincarnation, and I was like, "Mom, come on." And she was like, well, 2/3 of the people in the world believe in it. I mean, I think she was exaggerating slightly, but still, significant percentage. And I was like, who cares what 2/3 of the world thinks? In my infinite wisdom of a teenager, who absolutely knows everything, was just offended. Anyway. And, as Nirmala pointed out, coming to these teachings and re-encountering reincarnation reminds me of, I don't know if I can finish the joke, which is a complete drag, because if you miss the punchline, it's like, what's the point of telling the story? But there's this word called reincarnation, which I believe is what happens if you get reincarnated to Kentucky.
As a hillbilly.
As a what?
As a hillbilly.
As a hillbilly. There you go. Okay, it's a hillbilly. Anyway.
It's one of those words that you change one little bit to make a whole new
There you go. So,
definition.
Anyway. Setting that lightly aside, what struck me is that, because the automatic question is, well, how come I can't remember? That's kind of what Arjuna was asking prior to Krishna answering the question is, you're talking about all these thoughts. I don't remember it, so how can it be real? And Krishna, gives him the answer that he gives him, but there's a lot more behind the scenes, and what's behind the scenes is, how useful would it be to know? You think, people go to psychics, people go to all kinds of, get their reading from this or the other thing because, it'll tell me, I had somebody tell me, I was asking about a connection to a friend, that we were instant brothers in this lifetime. And it had to have come from another lifetime. And he went to a psychic, and I had given him this question, and I said, so get them to say what was our relationship. And what came back was, you have been very close for many lives. In one of them, you were in Greece as athletes, and you were competitors, and you would break each other's records, and which captured a certain aspect of the energy very well. Now, whether we were or whether we weren't, in a sense, is irrelevant because the energy of it said that and did that. So it was true, whether it was Greece or whether it was someplace else. That was a relevant aspect of it. But I just got to thinking, my Lord, if, in the study of the yamas and niyamas, they each of them give a boon if you perfect it. And one of them is non-attachment. At least that's one way to translate it. And if you perfect non-attachment, what is the boon? You can remember all your past lives. If you're completely non-attached to this one, then you can remember all the other ones. Because it will not throw you. Otherwise, if you're attached to this one, and you realize that in another lifetime you were the exact opposite, or you were a complete disaster in some other sort of way, then it's like, Or even if you just remember a long sequence of really, really lovely, beautiful lifetimes, and this one seems like a pain in the neck, what am I doing here? I'm stuck here. Then it's like, but why? And you keep wanting to go back. In Yogananda, in the Autobiography of a Yogi, we've been studying it. One of the themes that comes up again and again and again is he wanted to go to the Himalayas. It was like, get to the Himalayas, with a period after each word. Because he just, Nirmala talked about running away to grandma's to get away from, two people talking quietly in the house because it was too much noise. Yogananda was trying to get away from the commotion of Calcutta to another lifetime. We seek what we had that was deep and real and meaningful. It's one of the reasons I'm going to digress here momentarily, but if you look at all the political unrest is one way to capture it, but just kind of anxiety aspect. It's expressed in political unrest, but it's expressed in a whole bunch of other ways as well. People are running into somebody else who says, this is true for me. And they're like, how can it be true for you? What's true for me is something different. And what we don't realize in the West is, gosh, what's true for me and what's true for you don't have to be the same thing. I mean, love, one of the reasons we chose songs about love today, what is love, that Chaitanya sang at the beginning, and I'll do one in a few moments. Where has my love gone? Swamiji wrote this song as a mystical love song. Most love songs are about, she left me, he done me wrong. It's all about this very personal, it's the country and western song, If you wind it backwards, he gets back his pickup truck, his dog, and his girlfriend, all of whom left him. Anyway, this is a little deeper than that, because Swamiji is not writing to or about a person. This is a song to love. He's singing to love. Where has my love gone? Long are the nights. And we, all of us, in a sense, have left our love, perhaps in another lifetime, perhaps earlier in this lifetime. A week ago today, we lost, in the sense of from this world where we knew her, a dear friend, Seva, who had been on this path for more than 50 years, and just an amazing soul, a saint, a true saint at Ananda. She lived, her name, Seva, means service. She served literally served to the last, I don't even know, 5 minutes, 10 minutes of her life. She was literally serving at the Shrine of the Masters. She had finished her little shift that she was doing there, and she walked up the hill to go home. She didn't feel good, called a friend over to bring some fizzy water, and left the body. Had a heart attack, was gone. That was it. 86 years old. She lived a very full and beautiful life. You don't get that without love. You don't get that without manifesting love. And so thinking of her life, and as it happened this week, a childhood friend of mine lost his mother, who was 88 years old. And so I wrote to him. We had not communicated. I had no contact information for him. We had not communicated in 40-something years. But I wrote him an email, just said a few things about his mother and the gratitude that I had for that our two families were very close. Close enough that when our parents would go away, one family would move in with the other one for days or a week or even more, and vice versa. And we spent wonderful time together. And writing about his mother sort of took me back down memory lane. She was Finnish, which I didn't even know until just this week. She said, "You can always tell a Finn, but you can't tell her much." She had a very good, salty East Coast sense of humor. Anyway, I really appreciated it. But, I sort of took a journey down memory lane this past week because of thinking of these two souls, and realizing, of course, that you can wander around down memory lane for a long, long, long time. And it's one of the reasons that we don't remember our past lives, because, wow, you could just really drill in and fixate on one or another of them. Try listening to the music you used to love as a teenager or whenever. And it, brings you back to a different era, to a different consciousness, those feelings, those circumstances. And it has a magnetism to it. Nirmala was talking about sort of what is it that holds us all together. And it's this kind of vortex of magnetism that we think we're this. Well, what is the ego? It's nothing but just magnetism. It's a really, really, really strong magnetism, and we don't defeat it easily, but it is just magnetism. And we have to sort of unwind that magnetism, create a different one, offer it up. And so the song that I'll sing in a few minutes talks about that the drama, the journey of love, and inevitably there's struggle, inevitably there's heartache, inevitably something goes missing, and we know it, we feel it. I remember this very poignant example of it when we lived in India with Swami. The young woman who came every day to clean in the house was there, and this particular day when she came, Sumitra was her name. She said she was 16. We have a feeling she was probably a little younger than that. 16 was the minimum that someone could be in order to be hired like that. But she came, and just the energy was just off that particular day. You could tell something was really bothering her. And Swami was the only one in the house who spoke Bengali. Her English wasn't good enough, and our Bengali was zero. So Swami actually talked with her and asked her what was wrong, and she said her little nephew had died. Infant, newborn, had just passed away, and she was just completely distraught in a very real and natural way. It wasn't crocodile tears. It wasn't just so she could get out of work or something. I mean, it was genuine. 16, however old she was encountering death for the first time, and it was devastating to her. And she sat at his feet, which was very natural for her in her position with him. He wore these little fuzzy slippers, and little kind of furry sort of slippers. They were vegetarian, but nevertheless, they were very fuzzy. And I remember she was petting one of them kind of distractedly. It was the sweetest thing, but she felt comfort, and there wasn't much he could say to her. I mean, what can you say? How can you alleviate that? Only God can alleviate that kind of difficult circumstance. But it made me realize we are all of us, Sumitra. We have all of us lost something deeply precious to us. And it's love. Where has my love gone? It's the realization of we wandered away from home. We talked about the prodigal son a week ago. We've all of us wandered into foreign lands and had a great time kicking up our heels and then ran out of money, basically. In one way or another, we've all of us done that. And it's time to come back home. And I don't know, the pillar in the temple of my God, it may not be the most compelling image, but coming home certainly is. So whatever it is that draws you, try to feel that and rekindle the love in the heart that is deep and real, because that's the light that shows us where to find truth, where to find God.